Every Need for Speed game that killed Need for Speed. I have been working on this for a while, and it kind of finally makes sense to do so. Need for Speed has run into many issues, whether it's technical issues or whether it's staffing issues. Mate, the list is kind of endless, and so I thought this would be a great place to combine one big video where we talk about everything. Now, before we get started going into the specific games, there is a kind of overall section that definitely affects Need for Speed. Need for Speed games are usually affected by the very previous game's failings, especially early on when the internet was less of a big thing for games. So basically, if Need for Speed Underground came out and wasn't very good, Underground 2 would obviously be affected by that. All of these games suffer massive, compared to other titles, understaffing issues, and it's just a tremendous amount by comparison. Some of these racing games today, like Forza and The Crew, we're talking like multiple hundreds of staff. Need for Speed has never had like that size of a team. And we'll come back to how EA is kind of oblivious to that fact a little later. And of course, we live in 2026 right now, and every passing month, things become more and more expensive to do. Even though AI is supposed to save everybody, make everything incredibly cheap, we're still a ways away from that being a proper reality. Anyway, maybe we can be proved wrong. Let me begin with Need for Speed ProStreet, because this is probably a point that... Listen, I get it. Today, ProStreet has a cult following. It is a massively loved game in the Need for Speed community, and even the wider, previous, old Need for Speed community, people that moved on, they think it's actually quite a unique experience, and there lies the problem with the game at the time. Can you imagine being the peak of Need for Speed Underground? Need for Speed Underground 2 Most Wanted, Carbon, and then all of a sudden you get a track racer? It's kind of how we felt with Need for Speed Shift, but actually Shift was much worse. The fact they tried it again is kind of funny to think about. But you go from this open world racing game that's completely illegal, break the rules, blow up everything, and then you transition to track racing. And we've already got Gran Turismo. You know, we've got these other games that already kind of did that system in the kind of wider perspective better. You know, again, we go back on it and think that actually it was quite a nice game. It was probably more aligned to like Race Wars, Fast and Furious still. And today, I think people would buy a ProStreet 2, no question. But I still don't think it would be as much as a following as, say, Need for Speed Heat 2. But anyway, this is a significant part in Need for Speed because it massively didn't do as well as Need for Speed Most Wanted, Need for Speed Carbon. Those games were hitting 15 million, Underground 2 Most Wanted, 10 million with Carbon, and apparently, at least on the recorded statistics, we're talking about like 3 million, 4 million when it comes to the US sales for Need for Speed ProStreet. Nowhere near as good as it was. Now, something worth knowing is games are kind of different these days. It's tracked in a different way. Sometimes they just stop tracking after 2 years and the next game's out. In the old games, it's a little messy, so it's not a solid statistic to follow. And EA does keep their games available for longer than most other brands. Now, what if I told you this was the shortest of the categories? Because Need for Speed just gets messier and messier and messier. At least we know about it. Now that the internet's a thing, we can see things. Need for Speed Undercover. I know this one well, considering that I'm playing through it right now, and you can obviously see the problems. First up, incredible crunch. This is where Black Box starts to get messed around in a big way. ProStreet, they were absolutely gliding through, getting games out every single year. This is where things turned a little bit messy in the industry, as it kind of struggled to keep up. What I say about Undercover is all the systems, all the tools are kind of in place, but the polish, the finish, the game of it is kind of rough. I mean, what I think about it is kind of like the opposite of Horizon. Horizon does what it does, and it does it incredibly smoothly. No messing about, no trying to reach further. ProStreet is the complete opposite. And when you consider Need for Speed was going up against Midnight Club LA at the time, they released in like the same year. Kind of wild to think about, because that game is so much more packaged. Rockstar were here swinging, and you know, not anymore, because now everything is just one big game. Oh no, I just realized. That's what's happening with Battlefield and GTA. Oh, God. Okay, no, Sam, I'm serious. Let's back on track here. Basically, the output levels didn't transition the generation. This is where we were going from the PS2 generation over to the next generation, where games are going to start to take longer to make. They just cost more to make in time and effort. The transition was rough for Black Box. Let me make a list for you. This was the Black Box EA load at the time. EA Canada Black Box. Here we go. Skate, released September 2007. ProStreet, November 2007. Undercover, November 2008. Skate 2, January 2009. What the EA is absolutely balmy, mental, insane. EA had no chill, clear. Black Box couldn't keep up, and that was incredibly obvious. If you've played Undercover, you've seen Undercover, you know it was just a little empty. Clearly, a lot more passion, it seemed, went into Skate at the time, because again, it was something fresh, it was something different, and I'm pretty sure making the same thing over and over again, especially after you just made a game that tried something new, it didn't do well, and now you're working on another Need for Speed game based on the 4 that you just made, it's gonna be pretty burnouty. Anyway, with Undercover, they clearly tried to return to the style of Most Wanted and Carbon, but came up short when they had time and staff to think about. Restructuring happened literally in 2008. EA was way too quick to react on this, in my opinion, and that actually got rid of a lot of Black Box staff, and they combined EA Black Box and EA Canada kind of into one element, one unit, if you will, which basically reduced the resources even more, even though clearly what they needed at the time was more resources. But anyway, this brings us on to the next Black Box game that we all know and love, you know, Need for Speed The Run. Oh, this is a long one. The theme continued as the previous with Need for Speed Undercover. Not enough time, not enough staff. This is going to be a recurring thing. I'll try not to mention every single time. But here's the list once again of all the games EA Black Box and EA Canada formed in one now were working on at the exact same time. Skate 3, May 2010. Need for Speed World, July 2010. Need for Speed The Run, November 2011. It's worth remembering, Need for Speed World was a live service game that they had to tend to. And Need for Speed The Run was the first big Frostbite, not FPS game. They tried to make Frostbite into a racing engine, and it was rough. So they were pushed to Frostbite. This was clearly not a decision of anyone else. The idea was, and I think it's incredibly obvious, and it's something that I think is now quite successful, I mean, to a point, putting as many games on Frostbite as possible is beneficial to all the games on Frostbite. For example, Need for Speed Heat had a really cool character creation, okay, not really, but character customization system integrated in the game, and I think it was better than that of, you know, the later game. Anyway, they created that system for FIFA. That's right, the characters were created in FIFA, and that system was just taken from FIFA and put in Need for Speed, and it makes perfect sense. Why build it twice if it's very, very similar? This is kind of why I was hoping to see with Codemasters coming into it. I was really hoping that we were going to see Codemasters jump to Frostbite 2. Not on all their games, most of their games, because assets, models, so much could have been shared between. Grid could have become the Need for Speed ProStreet style game, and hell, call it Need for Speed Grid. I don't care what the hell you do, but you could have done different directions, but have the assets built once and shared between. Car models, one, you know, is a rally game, one is a professional racing game. We would have race kits that we could have put in Need for Speed, and customization could have come across to whatever. There was a missed opportunity. It didn't happen to the level it wanted to, but EA's plan here was to do just that system. Everyone at EA working on the same engine, meaning tools and effort is shared, which is just such an obvious thing, and I don't know why they're not thinking about this still. Something that recurs is that EA is way too quick to make a decision, or way too quick. Things move fast in this industry, of course, but I feel like they need to give things more time, and that could solve pretty much most of the problems. Anyway, The Run was a clunky mess. If you played Hot Pursuit 2010 the year before, Mate, that thing was polished, smooth, and honestly, the feedback from a lot of people was really good. And the licensing, I'm sure, was much easier than Need for Speed The Run with the crazy customization and stuff. Mate, it just looked like, why don't we do more of this? And it became pretty obvious as to why that shouldn't be the case when we moved on to 2012, with the most one in 2012 with no customization. Wow. I wonder why people didn't like that. Anyway, obviously, EA went the Criterion way afterwards. And something that I never understood is why Black Box weren't making the, like, Underground games, and then Criterion weren't making the, like, Hot Pursuit lighter games. And it could have been crossover. They could have had 2 years, 4 years each. If, and still giving us 2 games every 2 years. They could have done the COD style, and they just didn't. Anyway, major layoffs happened here. This was, again, a game that suffered from lack of scope. It wasn't a huge game. People bought it. They were kind of disappointed by the size of it. And once again, this is now a cult classic. Personally, at the time, I preferred Need for Speed The Run to Hot Pursuit. But the majority at the time, the press at least, when I think this kind of 2010 era was really heavy on, like, press kind of mattered, and it has completely shifted these days. I feel like it's the creator side that matters more so about publicizing it. Anyway, this was a difficult time for Black Box, kind of basically the end of Black Box. Their team couldn't find a balance to balance all of these games being worked on at the same time. EA clearly just demanded more and more output. They put quite a bit more effort, it seemed, into Skate than Need for Speed. They were kind of dwindling on that. Their MMO idea didn't really work with Need for Speed World, and the remaining became Quicklime Games. That might be something you remember, which basically just made more content for the MMO version of Need for Speed. So at this point, Black Box was gone. Any of those that they kept on outside of Quicklime was actually, this is kind of cool little tidbit, absorbed by Ghost Games. Yeah, that's really cool, because if you think about it, a lot of the people that worked on getting the Frostbite engine to actually function were going to be needed to continue on the Need for Speed Rivals route, because Need for Speed Rivals, once again, was going back to that open world element, and they had the know-how and the knowledge to get that shit running. Need for Speed The Run is always a really difficult one for me, because that's kind of where I think realistically I became most of a Need for Speed YouTuber around this time. I've always been a Need for Speed guy, but like I actually re-entered the series at this point because basically I was broke and I didn't get a PS3 or 360 until a little bit later in the generation, and I just didn't really make that transition. I stopped after Carbon, and I didn't buy ProStreet like a lot of people. So this one really hits home for me, because I actually got back into the series based on 2010, 2011, 2012. Mostly, I got Hot Pursuit at Christmas, so it was a little bit after launch. Didn't really like it, but The Run, I was back, baby. Need for Speed Payback. Now, this is probably where internet documents basically everything that we could possibly have, and this is clearly a game that most people still to this day, and I think this is the case because I reminisce about 2015. Hell, I even go like, oh yeah, Need for Speed Rivals quite good. Most people hate this game still to this day. It's probably the one Need for Speed that didn't build like a cult following after the fact. Now, while your timing's a little bit muddy, because realistically you're like, Theo, didn't Ghost close actually after releasing Need for Speed Heat? Yes, you would be very right there. However, this is where things get a little messy, and EA maybe actually did slow down a little bit to react, but the decisions were pretty solid and stupid. 2 EA games released around similar times, and both of them had microtransactions out the arse, specifically loot boxes, and that's when all the loot box situation happened, where the governments were saying, is it illegal, it's gambling for kids, blah, blah, blah. Battlefront 2 and Need for Speed Payback. Ignoring that E3, not E3 video where I'm sat in the back with a cool shirt. Yeah, it's a great game.
Yeah, it's a great game.
Marcus Nielsen was the head of that studio of Ghost Games, and he was since, well, the beginning of it. So he steered it to Rivals, he steered it to 2015 afterwards, and then steered it to Payback, which was maybe a little bit of a misstep. But anyway, Marcus Nielsen, head of the studio, departed a year after Payback launched. The way I see it is EA wanted someone to blame. They had to basically apologize to the investors for this misstep of these microtransactions and the fallout and making less money when they'd planned to make more money, that type of thing. And fun fact, there was never really a problem with microtransactions in Need for Speed Payback. If you played the game at all, you would have seen that it was completely unnecessary to spend any money in the game whatsoever. Like, even at launch, yes, it was a little bit more less less giving on those loot boxes, but the only thing you needed from those loot boxes, realistically, was air suspension. This is not a massively online game. In fact, they didn't have free roam at launch, which was just messy, and basically, someone needed to take the blame for EA's hit in both those games' directions. Ghost Games was the group of people that got hit, and Marcus Nielsen's departure kind of signified that was gonna be it. I actually came across his Twitter as I was doing a little bit of digging for this video, and it's literally frozen in time from 2015, which is incredibly sad. Man, what a time. Take us back. EA's stance as to why they gutted and closed Ghost Games was not one of they failed. That's, you know, they can't really say that. EA blamed lack of hireable talent at the time. They were stuck around the same staff level. There wasn't a huge growth in the amount of people they could pull over to Sweden. And in Sweden, in case you didn't know, employee protections are pretty high in their securities and whatnot. And this, I think, is partly why they didn't increase the staff numbers in a way that other studios may have. Criterion were in this weird limbo at the time. They were kind of working on helping with 2015. They actually helped a lot with the development on that. I think a lot of the cutscene stuff was done by Criterion, which is pretty cool to think of. And then in 2010, the Hot Pursuit, there was one in 2012. They actually also made the crossplay update for Need for Speed Heat, which was pretty amazing. That was actually Ghost UK, but Criterion. And this is the big one where I've just finalized my research on this because it is quite large. Basically, the UK has a lot of free money in tax breaks when it comes to game development. And over in the UK, we're forever kind of marching to mirror that of the US's kind of employee protections, which is basically nothing because the UK we're basically a state at this point, well, more so over time. Okay, there's this thing in the UK known as the Video Games Tax Relief. It's now actually known as the Creative Industries Tax Relief. I believe they're pushing into like all media, not just games. But anyway, there's a lot of games made in the UK. Rockstar is a big abuser of this, and they basically paid no tax for like 10 years while making games, which is fantastic. And they're in Scotland for the most part, which Scotland is a little bit more progressive than we are in terms of, you know, maybe people should, they don't have to pay for their university. It's incredible. Maybe I should have kids in Scotland instead. Anyway, right now in the system, I believe it is 20% of core production costs can be saved, which is a tremendous number. That is absolutely crazy. Saving on your tax bill is a very big reason as to why they would likely want to shift people back to the UK. It is a very nice thing to say that all of a sudden it costs 20% less in production costs to make a game. Have you ever noticed how pretty much every racing game is made within the UK? I say pretty much, but pretty much every racing game, there's so many studios in the UK. And one thing that I can't help but remember, when I was driving past where I used to live, there used to be massive shipping containers that were for sale. Okay, units. Massive units for sale, and they would advertise on the fucking board outside, and it would say, cheapest employee rates in the area, whatever. They would basically, UK advertises in a big way to companies that employment is cheaper here. We pay people less and they accept it. And there's so many reasons as to why you could say this is the case, but ultimately, anything in the creative and development space, you get paid less than America. So it is cheaper than the majority of the world to hire these people. Reduce costs, reduce costs. EA had a win-win on their hands and they absolutely took it. It is also quite weird right now because right now we are being a bit more progressive. There's a lot more employee rights protections. They are usually watered down to what's initially promised, but we are kind of heading more towards the US style where we're going to have less employee protections. I think the next kind of government that may come into place may reverse a lot of the progressive kind of push in the industry, but we tend to be a little bit nicer to employees than that of the US. So anyway, that's just some little politics for you there. Basically, we are kind of heading to more a US model where it would probably be cheaper, and I almost wonder if EA is kind of betting on that. I hope not. And then back to Sweden quickly. This is something that I always kind of knew roughly about, but in Sweden, this is a big one. Depending on how long someone has worked for your company, except in the case of someone being struck off for like gross misconduct or something, you actually have to give them at most, depending on how long they've worked for the company, 6 months paid notice before you let them go. So if someone worked at somewhere for 10 plus years, 6 months they are guaranteed stuck with you. You have to give them all the time in the world, and that makes it a little bit of a struggle for, you know, what people like to do in the games industry and absolutely just bin people off as quickly as possible. So anyway, Ghost was closed not long after Need for Speed Heat released, which is why we didn't get any of the updates. Some people were moved back to the UK, and some were just thrown into the wind. We should have seen it was kind of happening anyway. They were struggling to really promise much upward movement in this, because ultimately it's not Battlefield, is it? So anyway, we lost Ghost pretty soon after, even though it was their most successful launch. The tweet is still there. Absolutely gutted the studio, and now what's left is specifically working on Frostbite itself. So they do kind of still have some people there that are, you know, Ghost people. Whew. I'm gonna breathe a little bit there, but that's the big one, because we really just kind of watched it happen in real time, just like the jet. Anyway, next one, we kind of already know this, but I've gotta wrap it up. Need for Speed Unbound. Need for Speed Unbound had an issue straight away from the beginning because they were trying too much at once. We haven't heard this before. At the same time, it's just a generally messy development. I mean, think about all the games that they were working on. Need for Speed Unbound, obviously. Battlefield 2042. Battlefield 5. Didn't they have a bloody DLC for Battlefront as well? Messy. ASAP Rocky legal issues is something we've mentioned most recently. That he was going through a little bit of a situation where EA decided they didn't really want to push the game because they thought, well, we're trying to sell the company. We should probably not align ourselves with a rapper that, you know, may have killed somebody, or gun charges, or all the rest of it. Anyway, we've got dedicated videos talking about Unbound specifically, so if you want more details on that, you can jump to that. The ASAP Rocky issues basically meant that the hero car was pulled away from the game. He was pulled from the limelight, and it looked like the game kind of just changed direction completely, while also they were working on Battlefield, and some people were working on Need for Speed, and messy. The lack of PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series adoption, but also the lack of them being available, so you couldn't get one even if you wanted it to. Launching on new gen only for the first time in a Need for Speed game, that probably absolutely tanked what they expected to get. If they had launched this game on previous gen and new gen, I think honestly the situation would have been a little bit better. And then the huge visual art change, and that was mostly because they believed they wanted to make Need for Speed stand out in a big way. Criterion basically came in with fresh ideas, and I kind of know, based on quite a lot I've seen, that Criterion were actually trying to push EA to bring Need for Speed to them. They'd cooked up kind of an idea, and they basically, Ghost and Criterion at the time were kind of fighting as to who should have Need for Speed, like who has a better idea of direction. The EA, unfortunately, went with Criterion. This was something that you could see happen on like LinkedIn. It literally happened in public. We saw and employees getting real angry against the ex-head of Criterion, and then he jumped it's once again, it feels like a similar situation where the head has gone and they kind of struggled after that. And, you know, I'm ready and willing. I'll take a reduced salary because I just like Need for Speed. Come on, EA. I'm available. Anyway, they thought they needed a huge visual and ultimate change to the game. And I kind of, you know, disagree. But who am I to say? I don't know anything. So I did want to end this on, like, doom and gloom, bad. We're now kind of in a limbo phase with Need for Speed where they say it will return. This is still the latest news, by the way. Will return in new and interesting ways. Vince Zampella not with us anymore, which is horrible. I was planning to make a video on that, but like, I don't know, it feels like a bit of a sensitive topic at the time as when it happened. But basically, we should not really drive in that way outside of games. It should be kept to the games. Incredibly sad, real horrible for his family. I'm sure he's just over the moon at the point, but again, I don't want to go too far into this. I'm just taking it to another level. So anyway, here's some real, actual, good kind of carries on from mostly the Black Box era people. Might absolutely butcher the names here, but Darren Chung and Chris Parry were actually from Black Box, and they were rehired to work on the new Skate game after people were demanding Skate 4. Do you remember that? That was awesome. We need to do the same for Need for Speed now. Anyway, let's ignore the current state of the Skate game, but like, we're getting a new Skate game. That's, I mean, eventually. A large chunk of the Black Box team, funnily, I didn't know this, actually worked on Sleeping Dogs. Another fantastic game, by the way. A lot of the theming and the styling kind of matches that of those classic Need for Speed games. A lot of the artistic talent actually went to Respawn Entertainment. Eduardo Agostini, I again apologize if I get it wrong, but he was the art director for Most Wanted, Carbon, and The Run. He moved to Respawn, and he's actually, I think, the lead now. Like, he's doing amazing. Anyway, he became the art director for Apex Legends, another game that I have played. I don't play many FPS games. I did play quite a bit of Apex Legends. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And many people that were working at the very last kind of stand with Need for Speed The Run on getting Frostbite to work as a racing game. Fun fact, they then moved over to the full Frostbite team, actually giving us basically the EA tool we use today to make many games, including Need for Speed, which is, that's nice. That's nice. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that EA is, usually this good. Usually they just bin people off and they just leave the industry because they've been treated like shite. But anyway, there you go. Those are all the Need for Speed games that killed Need for Speed. And I thought it was an interesting topic. I'm sure there's nuance here. There's things I'm going to have missed. There's things that will come up again in the future. But as it stands, this is kind of the situation we are in with Need for Speed, where we're in a bit of a limbo. They lost their head, but he left by choice in this instance. And maybe with a fresh direction and a new set of rules in terms of, we should probably have more games than one, because Battlefield on its own is probably not a great... Like, EA is quick to make these decisions. I mean, Need for Speed. We're all waiting.